Hi, my name is Leah Granger, and this is Curtain Call, presented by FabCollab and with support from Heritage Canada. We're very excited to have a very, very special guest with us today, and very honored. Peggy Baker is one of Canada's most celebrated and influential dance artists. She's been a vivid presence in contemporary dance since 1973. And she's performed with Lars Lubavitch, Mark Morris, Mikhail Baryshnikov's White Oak Dance Project, and so many other projects. And here in Toronto, she established Peggy Baker Dance Projects back in 1990. And for the first 20 years, she dedicated herself to solo performance. And the praise that's been lauded on her over the past decades is so abundant that we're not going to heap it all on her right at the beginning, and we want to just let her tell us a little bit about her career and her art and the way that she approaches it. So I'm so excited to welcome to the program Peggy Baker.
Hi, Leah. So nice to see you.
Yeah, so wonderful to be able to meet with you across continents right now.
Right.
So welcome to the program, and thank you so much for speaking with us and for sharing with us and with our audiences. I'm wondering like what might be, and we have our audience is like a lot of dance, a lot of different artists in different disciplines, but for people that aren't familiar with your work or may only be slightly familiar with your work, would you be able to describe like a very seminal piece to us, just so people can get an understanding of what it is that you do?
I think maybe the easiest way for me to start speaking about my work is to talk about a solo, because that was, my 20 years of solo dancing was right in sort of in the middle of my career. And I think up until that point, I was totally giving myself over as an interpreter to the vision of really excellent choreographers that I was really, really drawn to. But in my late 30s, I started to wonder what I might do if I was left to my own devices. What would happen if I walked into a studio by myself and no one set me in motion? So I started to follow I guess I could say my lines of inquiry, and they have to do with entry points, a lot of them through literature, poetry, novels, even biography and autobiography, visual art, science, like the things that fascinate me in the world. Maybe I'll jump to a dance that I made, a solo that I made toward the end of making my solo work, because I think it kind of epitomizes what I came to in the end. It's a solo called Portal, and that's a word that we use all the time now because we've got all these portals in the World Wide Web. And I was thinking about that word in the same kind of way, as an entry point and as a threshold to witnessing for the audience, and also as a threshold to experience for myself. And it was a dance dealing with the subject, I could say, of mortality. So there's no music to this dance. The audience receives this dance just with the sound that we're all sharing in the theater, whatever is coming in from the outside world. Also the sound of my breath, the sound of their own breathing. And it's a dance that I made with my lighting designer, Mark Perron. And this is a very, very crucial relationship with Mark. And the audience discovers me in these very strongly lit, sort of, I'm going to say shards, because they have very hard edges on them of light, very specific directionally. The light comes up and down maybe 9 times during the solo, and each time the light comes up, the audience discover me in a different place. And I think it calls up the experience of our own psychologies and the kind of places of mystery. And I want to say also, more even than mystery, almost like a self-reckoning inside of that mystery, that we all experience in our own psychology. And honestly, the psychology of the moving body and how we read bodies, this is really being of primary importance to my work. But I would say the main thing with my dances is that they're a direct encounter between the performer and the audience, and the acknowledgement that we're there together, and that the event is unfolding in real time, and that their presence there is primary to the work itself.
Yeah, you've talked a lot about the importance of immediacy and about exchange. So is that something that only happens like when the work is performed, or is that something that is like, do you have that immediacy when you're working with when other collaborators, be it like lighting or dancing? Like how do you evoke that?
Well, yeah, exchange is primary. However, I think there's something very particular about the theater as it's developed in Western culture, of a space that we enter into. The audience, generally speaking, come in one door and the performers come in another, but we understand that we're arriving in a very particular place to receive a very particular kind of experience. And I think the fact that we can isolate that experience inside of that location, that everyone has arrived there to participate in that, this kind of transmission for me is very particular, and it's quite different than what goes on in the studio. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can have a deep transcendent experience in the studio on my own or engaging with collaborators, but it's still completely different than the public arriving and my arriving for them, to be present with them in order to, I don't know, maybe share the work, participate in the work together.
It's interesting to me, like the idea of working without music as kind of a way to amplify that.
Yeah.
To sort of like have and is the idea for you that there is like silence, or that there is like this sort of absence of silence, even though there's also an absence of music?
Well, an absence of music and a presence of sound. Exactly. And you know, most of my work I've made in silence, even when I'm choreographing to music, or even when I commission music later, mm-hmm. because I think that the rhythms of the body and the rhythms of choreography and the whole kind of architecture of choreography are very particular, and I think they're quite different from music, at least in relation to my own fascination around dance. For me, I think it was a bit of a breakthrough to dissociate dancing from music. I feel like I got to the heart of it more directly, in a more maybe vulnerable, raw, honest position, when the music wasn't insinuating particular mm-hmm. things about what I was doing. Because the music can develop climaxes, it can refer to rhythmic structures, it can refer to intimacy, it can refer to the build of things or the dismantling of things. And when the dancer is left to accomplish those things mm-hmm. without the support of music, maybe it falls somewhere a little bit between dance, theater, sculpture. I'm not sure, because you know, traditionally, I would say dance and music are such strong partners. And culturally, that's very often how they arise. but some of the questions that I've been asking myself about dance throughout my career have insisted that I dismantle and that relationship in order to establish it anew, with some new terms of engagement.
How does that work when you're working with a musician? It's something that I've attempted, and I found it really, because I found it's unusual, or that it's, yeah, especially with dance, it's like the relationship works in the opposite way, where the music exists and the music kind of like as you were saying, will often lead to certain conclusions. And so what I know you often work with the same people and develop close relationships with your collaborators. Right. So is it like that you are presenting this finished work and then they're composing, or is it that that sort of that you're finding your way there together?
Well, each situation is a little bit different. If I'm working with music that already exists and is going to be performed live, the musician works on their own as if I'm going to say as if they're preparing for a solo performance. Mm-hmm. And I prepare on my own with a creation relative to the music, but that has different pressures and influences playing on it. And we come together, I'm going to say late in the process, so the musician doesn't need to turn into an accompanist for my practice and repeat things over and over, but I can hear through the interpretation of the musician, my own choreography has I'm going to say it participates in a conversation with that performance. And I would say that it goes more with those kinds of performances where the score already exists. It goes more to my sense of listening and my own responses to the composition and to the performance of it. If the dance already exists and there is a musician who's improvising, it's the opposite. The dance needs to offer more of the stability and more of a score for the improvising musician to have the most amount of freedom. And then sometimes when I'm commissioning music, I'll come to the musicians when I'm moving toward a final draft, but I haven't achieved a final draft yet. So, but the final draft is something we arrive at together.
Mm-hmm. Do you hear music while you're creating? Like if you're creating without music, is there something in your head?
Well, I could say that, yeah, there's a sort of sonic world in my head. I wouldn't exactly call it music. Mm-hmm. Certain kinds of tones or textures. I think the same kind of way that we vocalize a lot when we're teaching. I don't know. Maybe we use sounds like ga or m. Like we do a lot of sounding when we're teaching or demonstrating movement, or even we kind of hear it in our heads while we're moving. But I try to let it be, again, a little bit open. It's not that I stop hearing those sounds once there's music either. Like I feel like I'm one player in a more orchestrated work. And very often when I'm working with the composer and they start bringing me things, I'll be responding in a sense of the things that are really striking a chord with me. The music that really is either presenting some friction with what I'm doing in a really good way, or is underscoring it. But also I want them to be free to be making their own music that is somehow stimulated also by what I'm doing. So you know what? I guess I could also say I'm not trying to make a perfect work with that person, that
Right.
is perfectly balanced and that it perfectly works in all these ways. I think I want to keep our authenticity as artists primary. And so that means there's going to be flaws. It means there's going to be elements that are not fully brought into a sense of completion. I mean, it's going to have, I guess I'm going to go back to this word that you pointed out earlier, immediacy. It's going to have the immediacy of the human act.
Mm-hmm.
This I find, you know, of primary importance.
Is improvisation of primary importance to your work? Because it feels like there's an element of improvisation to what you're describing, and that understandably has like such a high degree of immediacy because it like only came to exist in that moment, like between two performers. So how much of your work is sort of based on improvisation, or like that there's that you leave room for it, or how much of it is like tightly choreographed?
That's a complicated question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an improviser.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't consider myself to be an improviser, and yet I know that there's aspects of the work that are never spoken for except in the moment of performance. And some of those might have to do with duration, texture, dynamic, rhythm, emphasis, even some elements of level or position on the stage within certain parameters. I don't rehearse toward a perfected performance of a particular work. The work exists as a structure, as a score. Maybe, I've started to call this the choreographic object, as distinct from the performance of it, because the performance is a creative act in its own right, and it's in relation to what I'm, awkwardly right now calling the choreographic object, because I'm trying to find language around that. If we think about a script for a play, the actors are expected to deliver that script, not change it, but how they deliver it and what their motives are and the nuance behind that. So the words are one thing, but that is the script, but the performance of that is a completely transcendent act. And I think this about dance too. And I think a lot of Western dance is being performed as if the score is still present there. It's like a musician playing not from heart, but still reading the score. And I think I certainly learned to dance that way. It's on this beat, and this is the shape, and this is your motive, and I have let this go many, many, many years ago, but that is how I was taught.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us maybe, as you were sort of departing from like, I guess you never would depart from your learning, but I guess from the period where you were dancing other people's work, and when you moved into your solo work and your company work, which was also solo work, is how that became sort of your medium for so many years, was to be dancing alone.
Well, yeah, it's kind of, it was not a decision. Mm-hmm. Whereas my desire to be a dancer, that was so clear, and so I clearly put aside other things in order to follow that. So I could say that absolutely was a decision. But as I was, in my late 30s, and I was imagining at the time, there were not dancers in contemporary dance companies, very, very few of them in their 40s. The choreographer could be in their 40s or even beyond that, but the dancers were very rarely, older than that. And so I was picturing in my late 30s, I guess I must be getting toward the end of my dance life because I'm not a choreographer. And so I first of all sought out a whole bunch of people whose work I love. I'd never had a chance to work with them. And I asked, would you make a dance for me? And these incredible people said yes to me. I was living in New York at the time, so many of them were American. And these are names that many people who are listening to this won't know, and maybe some people will know. But these people are Annabelle Gamson, Melissa Fenley, Doug Verone, Terry O'Connor, and then Canadians, so these are possibly more well-known as names, Paul-Andre Fortier, Christopher House, James Kudelka. So these are really all dancers of my own generation, but doing very different kind of work than I was doing. And I did a concert of solos and duets with one of my good friends at St. Mark's Church in New York in 1989. And it was, I loved it. I loved being responsible for the whole doggone thing, like for pulling the money together, for, you know, organizing the program, for publicizing it, for collaborating with a lighting designer. And wow, that was so incredibly energizing. And then not long after that, I was invited to join the White Oak Dance Project. And this was a company put together by Mikhail Baryshnikov and Mark Morris. And I witnessed Baryshnikov also taking charge of his creative life. And of course, at a totally, you know, well, at a really high level, I can say, because he was world famous, he still is. But I realized through that work, this is what I also need to do. And, you know, in my own way, at my, you know, grassroots level that I'm working, but I need to be a dancer who's asking myself, where is my creative life going? This is a question that dancers enter in with now from day one. I think dancers now are creators and performers, but this was not the case in my generation. So I thought maybe I would be doing that for a few years, commissioning work, making my own work, and then honestly, it just ended up being 20 years.
Yeah, but didn't you find that it really suited you? Like clearly it was like, just like had, like you were in charge of it all, but also you didn't, for a long time, there was not a need to like bring other people onto the stage with you, that you were telling the story on your own. Was that like a challenge for you, or is that something that was really what suited you best?
Well, I never really fit in. I can say, yeah, like I was always an oddball, whatever company I was in. And some of this had to do with just being a very androgynous dancer. And so, for example, the company, both in the Lar Lubavitch company and with White Oak, I shared parts with men, but I was the only person to be sharing parts with men. It wasn't like, oh, we all do either thing.
Right.
I was often given a solo because I didn't quite fit in. And I think those choreographers also found that as a kind of a strength. I did find it as a bit of a frustration while I was in companies, because I wanted to be part of the group. But when I started doing my own work and having people make work for me, I got to really explore just how idiosyncratic and strange I am. And it was really liberating. And particular audiences, found it also a source of fascination. And also my main focus as a soloist was to explore and embody varied and relevant and authentic images of the woman as a dancer.
And is that what you feel like people most strongly responded to, or that those audiences have really connected with your work?
I do think so. And I think that because my audience is largely women, They've sort of gotten older as I've gotten older. And yeah, the personal thing, like the personal exchanges I've had with people who received my work and don't know me at all, but felt so strongly that they recognized something about themselves that validated some aspect of their own identity. I wasn't afraid to, well, and I think this is also, you know, a little bit what I never tried to present like the image of the dancer as like a perfection of technique or of body, or I allowed my flaws. I didn't try to indulge in them, but I did never have a rehearsal director, for example, because I knew this person's going to try to fix things up and make them look maybe a bit more expected or something like that. It was always between me and the choreographer. There was never, or it was me and it was my own work. And there it is. And I think that that was a bit of a relief for people who were used to receiving dance as a kind of epitome of physique and ability. And then, you know, as I got older, people were also, I think, interested to see an older person dancing.
Like very interested. It's like what you're saying. Yeah, it's just so liberating to think that way. And it's 2021. Like it maybe isn't like such a revolutionary thing to think, but then like as a dancer, just like listening to you say these things, and like, oh, it's just like, yeah, like it can be like that. And it's like, it has like you said, an immediacy. It's like you can connect to it in a different way than when it's, you know, has this sheen to it.
Well, and of course we have incredible models, but I'm not at all suggesting that these people don't look incredibly accomplished, because they do, but this already exists. You know, contemporary dance was just super late to the party, but of course this already exists in flamenco, in Bharatanatyam, in all, you know, where actually the older dancer and the nuance and detail is revered, and also the sense that they carry the continuity of the form literally in their bodies. And this is something, we always felt that about the choreographer and understood that about the teacher and the choreographer in Western dance forms, but now we start to come to a more full understanding of the interpreter as a person who carries tremendous knowledge through longevity and through the history that they lived out with their bodies, because we're in an art form in contemporary dance that, well, it's just over 100 years old, and it has always been in a state of incredibly fast evolution. And I would say that that evolution, I wouldn't say it stalled, but it slowed down last decade of the 20th century, I would say, because honestly, the ideas that arose out of, I'm going to say, Judson Church in the 1960s, those ideas were still not really challenged until maybe the last 15, 10, 5, and especially in the last 5 years. Because those ideas were ideas that emerged from white artists who were extremely intellectual in their approach and very highly trained. Like, they were mostly emerging out of the Cunningham technique, So like very particular influences, and what they, the challenges that they brought forward really held sway, I want to say, until really almost, for me at least, and I haven't had my own blinkers off until pretty recently, but I would say the last 5 years have really, major questions about the assumptions and the premise for work. Because it had nothing to do with politics, right, for example, and gender identity and race, nothing to do with that at all. They were way more aligned with, abstraction, the abstraction of visual art and music that emerged in the 20th century. And now we are at a very, very different place. And so the changes in our art form are crucial, and they're happening at a really, really hyper speed. It's really incredible.
Yeah, how do you feel about like what you're seeing and about this like rapid shift that's clearly happening?
Well, I think it's magnificent, yeah, in every way. And also, whatever led up to it had value, in that it led us to this moment. So it's not like, what were we doing and we wasted all that time? But we did hit a breaking point with imagining that the globalization of our cities, of our Western cities, and our immediate experience with cultures vastly different and geographically removed, it starts as a little shimmer, and now it's shaking at a rate that has cracks and absolute fissures that are, again, it's a whole liberation into work that is absolutely relevant and authentic and varied, like the things that I wanted to do in my own generation, but now the subject is, the stakes are so much higher. And because politics, which were not fully embraced within contemporary dance, I mean, they were by certain really high achieving individuals like Bill T. Jones, people like this who were, but they were very unique in that. And now I think this is going to become really at the heart and a primary preoccupation.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what it's been like creating dance for other dancers, like some young dancers that we've actually had on our own program before, and what it's been like to make that shift, and sort of how you do that, how you approach it, creating work for other people.
Well, for a long time, 10 years, is that long? From the time that I gave up my solo work and I started exploring making work on other dancers, at first I was really using choreographic tools, devices. I was still very much on my own terms, yet I was still caught up in the abstraction of 20th century contemporary dance that I've been referring to. And much more recently, as I was challenged by younger dancers to say, I don't enter this room as a dancer without my race, my gender identity, and my politics at the heart of what I'm doing. And so I've had the incredible opportunity to switch up my creative process in order to take a more well, a different role in working, and I've needed to go back in order to make this big switch in my practice. I've needed to go back to one-on-one. Because I'm not sure I would know how to do this with a group of dancers yet. But one-on-one, I was given the incredible opportunity of meeting younger artists in the fullness of their person and entering into a creative process with them to devise a very brief solo that premised on their own words around their identity. And we were working, with gender at the center of that identity, but only as maybe I shouldn't even say at the center, but it was part of a work called Her Body as Words. So because I was asking myself, Leah, what are the really burning issues for young, well, I would have even said women a year ago, but now I'll say female identifying artists. What are the burning issues for them right now? Because I came of age in the second wave of feminism. This is a long time ago. This is the 60s and 70s. But what we won at that time was control over our reproductive lives. So birth control, legal abortion, a much broader view of what our sexuality might be. We had a choice to not become mothers immediately, to not marry immediately, and those things went bang into the mainstream. And that is a very different place than we find ourselves now. And I wanted to interact with these incredible artists. Yeah, and some of them you've been interviewing very recently. The two that I'm aware of are Aria Evans and Tia Kushnerek.
Yeah.
And these are both artists that I am completely fascinated by and wanted to rise to the occasion of absolutely meeting them where they are and bringing and entering into a process of creation with them where they are the performers and where I am engaged in choreographic propositions for process with them.
So what does that look like exactly? How do you do that?
Well, I've been working from text for quite a long time. I've always been really drawn to it, and in my solo career, I made a few dances that either had spoken text, or they were based on poetry, or they were based on autobiographical text, or even part of the text from a play. So I was already using that a lot. In 2012, I started down a pathway that's really, I'm still really engaged with this, and I started down this pathway because 2012 was the centenary of the birth of John Cage. I wanted to create a work. I don't know if as an act of gratitude, maybe I will say that. And I used music by John Cage, and I used poetry, I'm going to call it, by John Cage. Anyway, I choreographed all of the movement absolutely based on the poetry. And then I did a second draft of it when I brought it to his music. But it was so invigorating to work strictly from language
Wow.
And I started developing a lot of tools for that. And the language doesn't exist in the finished work. In many of these works, it was a kind of a springboard or like scaffolding. But now with her body as words, I brought it much more into the forefront. So I built choreographic scores based on text by these different dancers, and I proposed, what do I want to say? I proposed action language that arose from the text, and it was developed for Aria and Tia in very different ways.
Yeah, because you had talked sort of about you wanting it to be their movements, that they wouldn't be just doing.
Well, I've always wanted that. Even before I decided to take a more to step back from being the choreographer with the idea and the vision and the, I've always and only wanted to see dancers' signature, like their physical signature. I've always been working with their movement. But the difference is now I am not establishing, I'm going to say much less of the premise. And so, and I'm still engaged in unraveling this, but I'm trying to find out what the collaborative relationship might be for me with younger dancers, where maybe the subject, maybe that's a good word to use, arises through the process, as opposed to I come with a subject. Because for me, that was always a primary fascination, and my subjects came from science and mathematics and all these different places, and I came in with these very elaborate concepts and subjects. And now I've made the decision to allow the subject to arise through the exchange, and completely. So I don't know where we're heading. So for example, I did a big project with the third year class at the School of Toronto Dance Theatre last year, which I mentored 13 dancers all simultaneously. They all entered into the same process with me. They were all given the same premises, but they all ended up making completely different works, of course. And we made, the title of the work was Just the Things That Are. And for me, that title arose through the exchange with those dancers. But it really, I felt like it really articulated what we were dealing with. This is completely not a non-starter in terms of how we're expected to write grants. I will just say that.
Yeah.
Because to say, I have no concept, but I'm going to go into 5 weeks of rehearsal with this dancer.
It's like, it will be me and them.
I mean,
That's what I know.
So I think, and yet I feel like in order for us, I think it always has been a really big barrier to have to describe what you're doing before, it's one thing to describe your process, but to describe the work that you're going to make before you've made it, and then to be judged on whether you made that work. This has always been completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, who knows what's going to happen now. I think my process, I'm able to, articulate enough for a proposal that it, but honestly, I'm really at a place where it's about process, and then it's the exchange, and the subject arises through the exchange with that artist and through different practices to allow what it is you care about, what you're carrying, and how you proceed with your work to birth the dance. And honestly, I know people who've been working like this all along, and I could use Paul-Andre Fortier as a really, really great example. He made me a full evening work in, I think it was 1999, or it might have been 2000. I think it was enough at the time for me to put in an application to say that Paul-Andre Fortier was willing to make a full evening work for me because he'd made so many for himself. Mm-hmm. But he had no idea what was going to happen, and that was my first time really being in a completely like I had no idea what to hold on to, what was important, what wasn't. Like I had to manage such a huge amount of material because it was so late in the process when he let certain things drop away to allow the work itself to come forward.
It sounds like it just feels, just in the way that you speak about your work and about other artists and other dancers and about your career, is like you have such a level of like intensity and like intention, and how like everything, you've given so much thought to everything, and like there's so much intention in everything that you do and you say. And you've talked about before about just how you feel like you've really found the form that like gives you the language to express like who you are and what you do and what you think and where you're at in any particular moment. Like, do you feel like that's luck, that you are sort of like in this place that really seems like right for you? I feel like so many artists are just like hoping that they're in the right one, like in the right place, that they're struggling to find their voice. And how do you feel like this happened for you? Is that it? Does that make sense?
Oh, I've been struggling. Yeah, well, no, I think it's the intensity you're responding to, because I think everybody who knows me would say, oh yeah, she's really intense. I think that's what you're responding to, but I have a profound level of uncertainty about what I'm doing. It's just that I'm committed to doing it. I'm committed to doing the work. I'm committed to staying in the studio, doing the work, and see things through. I won't just let something go and just say, well, I couldn't figure that out, so I drop it and I go on to something else. I'm going to stick with it to try to understand
We're losing our connection here. Hello? I wonder if Peggy, are you there? I'm not sure if there's anything I can troubleshoot here. Hello? We seem to have lost Peggy. I'm gonna wait to see if she's gonna pop back in. There she is. We've got you back.
I'm back. Just
Perfect.
before I disappeared, a little flag came up saying your internet is unstable. Wi-Fi. Anyway, you had asked me if I've always felt so sure about what I'm doing, but really, and this is not even a confession, because people who work with me also know, pretty much the first thing I say is, I don't know what I'm doing.
Right, okay, good, that's reassuring.
I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm an artist. I work in dance. that's the medium we're going to move through this, and we're going to discover what it is that, that's going to manifest by managing different materials and processes. And I mean, I look back now at a lot of the things that I did, and I just think, wow, I was so naive or so, superficial, or such poor choreography, or such a poor performance, but still at the time I put everything I had at that moment into it.
That's where you were at.
That's where I was at. And I think visual artists, and I know, I have friends who are visual artists of my age. These people go back and they destroy work that they're like, I'm getting rid of that now, because that sort of undermines what I've come to. Well, we can't do that in dance, and especially in this day and age.
Yeah.
And so we have to live with and carry forward all of our work, weak, strong, good, bad, and we're still appraised by that. I mean, I know we say, oh, you're only as good as your last performance, but that's absolutely not true. What is true is people make assumptions about you based on your earlier work, and possibly don't imagine that you ever moved beyond that. And I think especially in dance, people jump to conclusions very, very quickly.
But it's all part of your story, each of those pieces, each of those moments.
Yeah. And I can see what I was handling at the time also. I can see what that had to do with my life.
Yeah, and it's like you created such an incredible story, but also there's this like beautiful record of basically everything you've been through and experienced and felt and expressed.
Well,
and I'm sure there's more to come. I don't want to take up any more of your time because you've been so generous and I really appreciate it, but it's been so wonderful to hear about your process and about your life and about how you work with other
Leah,
people.
I totally appreciate that you wanted me, included in your conversations with artists also. So thank you, because I still want to be doing what I can for my community and for my milieu, and so it's really beautiful to feel your embrace.
Well, thank you so much. We're very honored. Very much. And it was very wonderful to speak with Tia and then to speak with you and just to hear both of you in the same sort of like bookended little.
Oh, great.
It was wonderful. So thank you. And if people want to look for Peggy's work, they can visit peggybakerdanceprojects.com. That's your website, correct?
Yes.
And then also on social media at Peggy Baker Dance Projects. And I also wanted to mention that we'll be coming back with more music with Girls with Gear on October 26th. And you can still watch Women in Song Strange Darlings, which actually features Aria Evans, who was dancing, choreographing, and also was our movement director for the whole evening. So please check those out at fabcollab.ca. And thank you so much, Peggy Baker. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Later.